Chapter 11. So often it's the little things that are the hardest. We'd had a night of death and horror, of fear and panic. We'd seen many people die, and we'd seen one die at the closest of quarters. We'd lost many of our possessions. Anything we'd had in the tents at Harvey's Heroes campsite was gone forever. But trying to climb that tree to get back into hell was the hardest thing of all. Before that, though, I found I hadn't lost everything. We were standing waiting at the base of the tree for Robin to return. She'd taken the odds and ends from the soldier's pocket and gone back to his bush grave to throw them in. She'd even picked up the knife, all sticky and red. It made me think of picking up Homer's bloody shotgun at the Buttercup Lane ambush, and I shuddered in memory when I saw Robin reach for the knife. The only thing we kept was a torch. So there Lee, Fee, and I were, waiting for Robin, watching Homer, who was using a small branch to sweep the ground and conceal our tracks. We had to avoid drawing any attention to our stepladder, and as we watched, Lee felt for my hand and put a small object in it. It was warm and furry, and for a second I thought it might have been something horrible. I looked down with my mouth squirming. It was my little chocolate brown teddy bear, Alvin, only the size of a cigarette packet, one eye missing and both ears chewed. A big worn patch on his bum, but my Alvin, my bear. "Oh, Lee," I said, my eyes filling with tears. "I thought I'd lost him." "I also meant, and I thought I'd lost you." He just shrugged, but I knew he was pleased. "How'd you find him?" "Oh, Lee, I was getting scared of you. You seemed like you'd changed so much." He ignored the last part of what I said and answered my question instead. "I got him from your tent." "What? How could you?" "I was just sneaking in the back of it to wait for you. You were the only person I felt like talking to after what happened on the road. Then the shooting started. Alvin was on the ground at my feet, so I grabbed him and got out of there." "Where'd you go?" "Along the ground, then I found some cover." "How? Where?" "Behind some bodies." "Behind some bodies?" There were 4 people who'd been sitting together in the eating area. They'd fallen in a row when they were shot, each one leaning on the next one. I hid behind them. Oh God. I stayed there till the soldiers started coming through the camp. They had a few prisoners. Everyone else was dead. I saw what they were doing to the bodies, and I saw what they were doing to the prisoners, so I ran. "Did they see you?" Robin had returned, and although we should have been going up the tree, we were all too hypnotized by Lee's story. "Yes, but they couldn't shoot because they would have hit their own soldiers. They weren't very organized. They fired a few dozen rounds in the bush after I was out of the camp area, but I was expecting that, and I was dodging around and keeping flat and using the trees. Last I saw them, they'd started burning tents. They didn't follow me." "They followed me," Fee said in a small voice. "Yes, but you're a girl," Lee said grimly. I saw how they were treating the women they'd caught. Homer started climbing the tree. "What happened next?" I asked urgently. "I just ran and ran. By the time I'd calmed down a bit, I didn't know where I was. Eventually I figured out that you might be here, if you'd survived, but then I had to figure out how to get here." Robin began to follow Homer up the tree, and Fee moved into a position to do the same. "What happened to you back at the fire break?" I asked. "Well, I ran like mad when they started shooting at us. When I realized I'd lost you guys, I thought I might as well go straight to the camp." "Thank you for my bear," I said. I gazed at the cliff for a few moments, thinking all kinds of thoughts, wondering how long this wall of rock would stand here and what else it would see and hear. I wished I could write its story, do something lasting, something good. I turned to Fee. "Come on, Fee, from Wirrawee. Make like a koala, make like Alvin." I slung the dead soldier's rifle across my back and watched the 3 of them. Homer was now at the top, which was the thick base of the old white tree, because of course it had toppled from the top. Robin was right behind him. Fee started slowly edging up towards them. "I told you we should have got some rope," Homer called down. "Remember the outward bound stuff?" Robin said. "You've got to dig your toes in and use your fingertips." That was the extent of our knowledge about rock climbing. Homer abandoned the safety of the tree and began working his way up the last stretch of cliff. Even from the bottom I could see the tension in his arms and legs as he searched for holds. His head was sideways, and he looked like a gigantic insect crawling up the vertical rock face. We watched nervously, knowing that we would soon have to follow him. It was only a few meters, but the cost of failure was pretty high. But then he flung an arm around the top and, with a last gigantic effort, pulled himself up, rolling out of our sight for a moment before reappearing, standing at the top, looking down and smiling. "Piece of cake," he said. Robin followed, doing it very quickly, going up in one continuous burst till she too rolled over the top. By then, Fee was at the top of the tree and looking up anxiously. "Come on, Fee," I called from the bottom. Lee started up the tree as Fee began tentatively to reach out and feel for a handhold. Robin and Homer were like stereo speakers, urging her on. She went very slowly, using the sides of her shoes instead of her toes, and halfway up she froze. I could see her legs shaking. "Come on, Fee," we were calling. "I can't," she cried. "Come on, Fee," Robin said urgently. "The soldiers are coming." They weren't, but it worked. Fee gained another meter with a little scrambling movement, then flung her arm up and grabbed at Robin's. Luckily she caught it. I hate to think what would have happened if she hadn't. Even so, Robin had to haul and haul before Fee, clinging like a dead weight, was dragged over the top. Fee had been brave so many times, shown such strength, but it seemed like she'd been wiped out by the last 12 hours. Lee got up quite easily. It was a definite advantage being tall, but at the last branch by then. I was at the last branch by then and watching him. I worked out my route a bit further to the right than Lee's, and with a big gulp of pure fear, I left the security of the tree and started out. The main thing was not to panic. Every time I started getting the wild feelings that I would fall, must certainly fall, I told myself to think brave, to get control of my mind, to be strong. But I found myself getting physically tired. I was hungry, my knee was hurting, and I was taking too long to make the climb, using up my energy. I accelerated a bit, glanced up, and saw Homer's hand outstretched towards mine, just within reach. "I don't need any help," I said crossly. At that moment I fell. I was so quick, without warning. My fingers all lost their grip simultaneously. I knew I was too far across to catch the tree, and I knew quite clearly that I had two choices: to use my hands to break myself and rip up my hands doing it, or to go into free fall and break my legs. I used my hands. I was so close to the cliff face that I could deliberately press into it, grabbing at it, scraping against it, using any point of contact possible. Knees, toes, chest a few times, and hands all the way down. I landed at the bottom without ever having reached out of control speeds, but I hit heavily, jarred my knee again, and rolled across the ground till I fetched up against a rock. I lay there grimly, hating everything. I didn't dare look at my fingers. I got up and shook the dirt off my clothes, then walked back to the tree. Angrily, I started climbing it again, ignoring the stinging in my hands, the dull pain in my knee, the ache in my back. There were cries of distress above me, the other four leaning over and calling out like lonely cockatoos. "I'm okay," I muttered, knowing that they couldn't hear me. I got to the top of the dead white trunk again and paused there for a minute, hugging it, shaking a bit. "Chuck up the rifle," Homer called. I realized the automatic weapon I had slung across my back was still there. That was the ache in my back. I was lucky the rifle hadn't started firing. I clumsily slipped it off and held it balanced in my hands for a moment, then flung it hard and high up over the top. It only just got there, but Robin grabbed its butt as it started to fall again and hauled it up. A minute later, she reappeared over to my left. "Come this way, Ellie," she called. There was an easy ledge over there, but it didn't lead anywhere, so none of us had used it, but I saw what they were trying to do. They'd formed a human chain. Lee was holding Robin and she was dangling over the cliff, holding the rifle. I couldn't see who was holding Lee. I edged my way over there and reached up. I could just grab the barrel of the gun. "Oh, Ellie, your poor hands," Robin said. "I hope you've unloaded this thing," I said. "Yes, we have actually. Can you hold on?" "Yes, go on." "You're sure? Just do it." She began to shout full back as we both held on grimly. For a moment she had all my weight, but then I was able to use my feet to help her, walking up the last wall of rock. Then Homer and Fee were grabbing me under the armpits, hauling me over the top. I landed on top of Robin, then crawled off and collapsed by myself, utterly done. Fee took my right hand and fussed over it. I lifted my head and looked curiously. The hand was shredded and bloody, the fingertips were red raw. All the pads were gone except on the thumb. The left hand had looked almost as bad. The more I looked at them, the more they stung. There was nothing any of us could do except cry, and so we did that. Nothing like a good cry. I remember my grandmother saying, "We were cold, we were ravenously hungry, we all had aches and bruises and cuts, and above all, we were shocked and desperately unhappy." It was probably only about 7:30, and the sun was not yet strong enough to lighten or warm the terrible darkness that had filled us during the night. We sat there, in under the trees. We were still security conscious and bored like little kids. My eyes ran, my nose ran, and when I tried to wipe all the drips away, my hands hurt too much to use them. Fee lay with her head in my lap and cried until my jeans got damp. Eventually I dried up a bit. I lifted my head and looked around. We were a miserable sight. Robin had dried blood all over her face. Lee had a swollen eye that was starting to darken. We smelled like we hadn't washed in months. Our clothes were torn and dirty. We'd all lost weight since the invasion, which made our clothes loose and shabby. I looked at Lee. He stood there with the bush behind him, gazing calmly back at me. Like a lot of tall people, he usually stood with his head down a bit, so you could see the back of his neck, the way it arched. He wore a grey t-shirt with a lightning flash across it, and the words "Born to Rule Tour." I knew what was on the back, the name of his favourite band, Impunity. His jeans were gone at the knee, and one boot had a lace which had been broken and retied so many times that it was hard to tell which was the bow. As always, he wore the t-shirt out, not tucked in. It was torn off the right shoulder, torn again at the heart, and had a burnt hole in it under the word "rule." The bottom of it was like ribbons. It was so wrecked. Despite all that, he was so graceful, so dignified, that I fell in love with him completely at that moment, in a way I never had before. I gave him a little weak grin and lifted Fee off my lap. "Come on, guys," I said. "Let's get out of here." "Did you know that's the most commonly used line in movies?" Lee said. He had his head on one side as he looked at me. I had the uncanny feeling that he knew exactly what I was thinking. But all I said was, "What?" Lee just shrugged. "That's the most commonly used line in movies. It's used in 60% of movies or something like that." He came over and lifted me as the others stirred into action. We limped over to the creek to start the trip I was dreading. The long, uncomfortable struggle back upstream, hunched over, with the cold water constantly tugging at our legs. The only good thing, and bad thing, was that we no longer had packs to weigh us down. I spent quite a lot of the trip taking inventory of the things I'd lost. It was depressing. We'd had so much taken away already. It seemed unfair to keep losing more all the time. Maybe we'd lose everything eventually. Our happiness, our futures, our lives. Maybe we'd lost 2 out of 3 of those already. I cried a bit more as we battled our way up the creek into hell. The funny thing was that it was still only mid-morning when we struggled into campsite. It felt like lunchtime at least. Before the invasion, our days had hardly started at 9 a.m. We'd be sitting in a classroom, our hair rumpled, rubbing our eyes and yawning. Now we had been through more, had suffered more before breakfast than we had a right to expect in a lifetime. And that was another thing I had to learn, that expectations meant nothing anymore. We didn't have a right to expectations. Even the things we took for granted, we couldn't take them for granted because those were expectations too. One thing it had never crossed my mind that Chris wouldn't be there. That never crossed my mind, but he wasn't there. At first we didn't get too excited, just tore at food held in both hands while we called out for him. At least that's what the others did. I felt too sick and my hands hurt too much. I'd thought I was hungry, but suddenly I couldn't eat. I sat on a log watching Robin wolf down baked beans and cheese, Lee get into biscuits and jam, Fee eating an apple and dried fruit, and Homer attacking the muesli. With her mouth still full, Robin went and got the first aid kit and brought it over to me. "How are your hands?" she asked. "All right, I think my knee hurts more." I'd let my hands trail in the water quite a few times as we'd laboured up the creek, so the gravel and dirt were washed out. Now the skin around my fingertips looked soft and tender, but the pads on the fingers were the dark strawberry red of blood, and little shreds of skin hung off them. Basically, I'd sandpapered the pads off. I had gravel rash on both palms, which stung too, but didn't look as bad as her fingertips. Robin smeared cream all over the bloodied bits, then carefully bound each fingertip in gauze and bandages. At the same time she fed me, like a mummy bird with her chick. Although I must have looked pretty silly by the time she finished, sitting there with my 8 fingers sticking up in the air, each wrapped neatly in its own little white beanie, I did feel better, especially with some dates and sweet biscuits in me. "Where do you think Chris might be?" I asked her as she finished wrapping my last finger. "I haven't got a clue. We've been gone quite a while. I hope he's alright. I must have been lonely here alone." "Yes, but I don't know whether that would worry Chris." He's a funny guy." After our meal, we started looking for him in earnest. There wasn't far to look in hell. We knew he wasn't in the hermit's hut because we'd passed that on our way back to the clearing. Homer and Fee checked the path all the way back to Wombegonu, while the rest of us started searching the bush in case he'd had an accident. I walked around holding my hands in the air, feeling useless, but there was no sign of him in the bush. When Homer and Fee got back with the same report from Wombegonu, our fear and tension levels started rising again. It seemed so cruel after what we'd been through, but cruel didn't mean anything either. I'd learnt that ages ago. We met again in the clearing. "I don't think he's been here for a while," Homer said. "The fire looks like it hasn't been lit since we left." "Maybe he didn't bother to light it," Fee said. "It's been cold at nights." "All his stuff's still in the tent," Robin said. "As far as I can tell. His sleeping bag's there and his backpack. I went and had a look in the other tent too. I was looking for Chris's notebooks. If for some extraordinary reason he had gone away from hell, I was sure he would have taken them. But they were all there. He had 4. I peeked into the one on top and it was only half full, so I assumed it was the current one. Surely he wouldn't have left that. I came back to the group. Fee was looking scared and saying, "You don't think anyone's been here, do you?" "No way," I said. "Nothing's been disturbed." Lee had checked the chooks and the lamb. "They've got water and food," he said. I went and had a look there too. Not because I didn't trust Lee, but because I knew that as a townie there might be details he wouldn't notice. I came back to the others and reported, "Their water's a bit stale, hasn't been changed for a couple of days." What else could we do? Seemed like we'd already exhausted the immediate possibilities. We sat there looking at each other. "I don't think we can do any more today," Homer said. "If he's left hell, he could be anywhere between here and Stratton, or beyond." "He could have followed us into the Holloway Valley," I said. Fee gasped. "Don't say that." "Look," Robin said, "let's not freak ourselves out. There just isn't anything we can do right now. We need sleep desperately. Like Homer said, he could be anywhere. If there was one specific place we could walk to and have a chance of finding him, well, I guess we'd shake ourselves up and go there. But we're not in any shape to have an emu parade through the whole Wirrawee Valley. Let's go to bed." "Easier said than done," Lee said. "We don't have any beds." He was right. Our sleeping bags had gone, probably burnt by the soldiers by now, in the wreckage of Harvey's heroes. We started scrounging around. We had a couple of blankets, half a dozen towels, and quite a lot of warm clothing. We all got warmly dressed, wearing balaclavas and thick socks, and, for the other 4, gloves as well. Fee had to dress me like I was a shop dummy. Then we dragged ourselves off towards the tents, carrying all the extra bits we'd found. "No one's allowed to make any noise for the next 4 hours, I called as I waddled along my jarred knee. "Yes, Mother," Homer called back. Fee and I crawled in together. I lay down while Fee spread towels and a blanket over me. Then she did the best job she could of covering herself. When she'd finished, we just lay and looked at each other. We were face to face and only about a metre apart. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then I just said, "Oh, Fee." "Yes," she said. "I know what you mean." "Lee doing that," I said. "I was horrible." "Do you know," Fee said, "with the soldier just lying there all that time, I sort of got to like him. I thought I knew him, sort of. I started forgetting how he'd been following me." "So did I." "How old do you think he was?" "I don't know, no older than us." Fee shivered. "What's this doing to us? What's going to become of us?" "I don't know." "I'm scared," Fee said. "I don't know what'll happen." I'm scared too, but you never look scared. Don't I? Don't I really? God, I sure feel it. When you fell down the cliff, I was scared then, but there's no time to get really scared when things like that happen. Anyway, that was my own dumb fault. Homer offered me a lift up, and I wouldn't take it. Your fingers looked terrible when you did get up. You ought to have seen them from my eyes. Do they hurt much? A bit. I wish I could be brave, Fee said. You are, Fee. You don't realise you've done so many things. You've never let us down, not once. Those people on the road, Captain Killen and the others, we just saw about a dozen people killed. Do you realise that? Dead, killed, dead bodies. And Sharon and Davina and Olive, I bet they were killed too. I'd never seen a dead person before this started. The only dead things I'd ever seen were animals on the road, and our class guinea pig in year 2, GP he was called, he died, and I cried all afternoon. Now it seems like it's all death. I wonder where Chris has gone. It's weird. Did you know he drank a lot? What do you mean drank a lot? Well, anytime he could bring grog in here, he did, and then he drank it all himself, I think. Well, that wouldn't add up to much. But the night we went out and attacked that convoy, he was pretty pissed then, I think. And the day we left, he was into it at 10 o'clock in the morning. So what are you saying? I don't know, just that I didn't like it, I suppose. The way he was doing it behind our backs. Are you saying he's an alcoholic? No, not that, but I think he's got some kind of problem with it maybe. And I think he's a strange guy and getting stranger. And we don't seem to be getting on with him like the rest of us do with each other. Don't you think he's getting harder to talk to? Yes, but I've never been able to talk to him that easily. He was so out of it at school. He's interesting though. He writes so well. I think he's a bit of a genius. God, yes, but I'll never understand him. If you could choose one person to have here, who would you have? My mum. Not counting relatives. Well, Corey and Kevin, of course. Yes, but apart from them, I think Alex Law. Alex, she's so two-faced. No, she isn't. You just never made the effort to get to know her. She hates me. No, she doesn't. You think everyone hates you. No, I don't. Just every girl in school and every boy and every teacher. No one else. So, Mr. Whitelaw likes you, huh? Mr. Lightlaw was the school janitor, and he really did hate me because I dobbed on him once for perving on the girls' changing room. He was lucky he hadn't gotten the sack that time. Oh, sorry, I forgot about him. Who would you have? Miriam. She's nice. I was enjoying this conversation. It seemed like the first normal conversation we'd had for ages. It was like we'd gone back to the old days for a while, before the invasion. What did you think of Harvey's Heroes? I asked. Fee thought for a bit. It was strange, wasn't it? Mr. Major Harvey, really deputy principal. Apparently. Where did he get the uniform from then? Oh, who knows? Probably out of the costumes cupboard. He'd been in the Army Reserve, Olive said, but not as a major. I liked Olive. Yeah, she seemed okay. What about Sharon? I considered for a moment. I remembered again that Sharon was probably dead, and that made it hard for me to say what I really thought. She wasn't too bad. I mean, you wouldn't choose her out of the whole world to be your best friend, but I got to like her. I sort of depended on her. Fee said. It was strange being around adults again. Good, but strange. It wasn't all good. They thought we were so immature. They didn't give us a chance. They were so annoying. I mean, we've done twice as much as them, and they treated us like we were barely capable of drying the dishes. Do you know, Mrs. Hoff wouldn't let me heat water in a frying pan to clean it because she said I might burn myself. And all that time, Major Harvey's sitting around talking about how short of men and weapons they were. We've got 6 people and practically no weapons, and we've done really big things. We've made a real difference. But adults, they're always like that. Do you want to grow up? Yes, of course. What do you mean? Well, I've been thinking, adults often look so unhappy and depressed, as though life's so complicated and so much trouble, and they seem to have stuffed the world up for us. I know being our age isn't always fun, and we have problems too, but I don't think they're as bad as adult ones. We just have to have a better job, that's all. We just have to do a better job, that's all. But that's probably what they said when they were our age. You get so caught up in your own life. We should have taken more interest in stuff. Remember when Kevin was asking about what treaties we had with other countries. None of us had a clue. We shouldn't have left everything to politicians. Politicians, Fee said. Suddenly she was angry. They're scum, they're slime. I giggled. Wow, Fee, that's pretty radical for you. Those broadcasts, they made me sick to my stomach. I knew what she meant. Listening to our political leaders broadcasting from Washington, their lies and excuses and promises made all of us so angry that we'd agreed to turn the radio off when they started talking. I thought you wanted 4 hours silence, Lee grumbled at us from the next tent. Sorry, I said guiltily. Fee was yawning and shifting to a more comfortable position. I'm going to sleep, she said. Okay, good night. All morning. She seemed to go to sleep quite quickly after that. I didn't. I lay there all morning, drifting occasionally into a drowse, but waking up again almost straight away. Sleep had been the last escape open to me, but even it was starting to close its doors. It had been a problem to me ever since the Buttercup Lane ambush. For all I know, it'll be a problem to me for the rest of my life. For all I know, the rest of my life won't be long anyway.